I heard the scream before I saw the blood. One sharp, echoing cry, then silence, broken only by the crunch of boots on frosted leaves. I wasn't supposed to be there. My son Jason had told me I'd just slow them down on the hike. So I'd stay behind, or at least, that's what he thought. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd followed at a distance. Not to spy, not to intrude, but because something in my gut screamed that something was going to go wrong.
And it did.
On the narrow ridge of Sable Peak, Jason lay crumpled against the rocks. Face pale, lips cracked, his wife Erica unconscious a few feet away, their water packs bone dry. I had minutes to decide, reveal myself and intervene, or walk away and let nature deliver the consequence they might have earned. After everything they'd done, what did they really deserve? But here's the thing. What kind of mother walks away from her own son, even if he spent years treating her like a burden? I'm Margaret, 63 years old, retired schoolteacher, quiet, unassuming, the type most people stop noticing after a certain age. But I wasn't always this invisible. Once I led wilderness rescues, trained in survival, scaled cliffs most people wouldn't dream of. And now, here I was unseen again, but for a very different reason. I saved them without a word, called for help from a burner phone, left before the helicopter landed. Let them believe luck had spared them. Then I returned home and began to plan. You see, they took my silence for weakness. But silence is a powerful thing when you know how to use it. For years, Jason and Erica lived in my house, drained my savings, treated me like an unpaid maid. They laughed behind my back, made decisions without me, left me out of holidays, but they never imagined I'd stop playing along. So while they recovered in the hospital, I quietly turned the tables. And when they returned from the luxury cruise I graciously sent them on, they came home to an empty house and a letter. Everything they had was gone, donated, erased, locked out. That's when Jason screamed again. But this time, no one came running. The moment I saw the empty look in Jason's eyes as he was turned away from the company he once ran, I knew the unraveling had begun. There must be some mistake, he insisted, voice cracking as the security guard refused to let him in. But there was no mistake, just consequences. I had watched him for years walk through life with arrogance, coasting on a legacy he didn't earn and a support system he never appreciated. He never once asked how I was doing, never said thank you when I covered his debt, never brought me a cup of coffee without expecting something in return.
But now?
Now he stood outside his own empire, holding nothing. Not power, not pride, not even a keycard. That evening, he collapsed onto my sofa like a deflated balloon. They fired me, he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Just like that. I looked at him quietly. No pity, no shock, just a small, careful nod. That must have been hard, I said, setting down a steaming bowl of chicken soup in front of him, the same way I always had, even when he didn't deserve it. He didn't know it yet, but the cruise I offered the next day wasn't kindness. It was closure. A final act in a play I'd been rewriting for months. You two should get away, I said warmly. Rest. Reset. Erica lit up like I'd handed her a golden ticket. Thailand sounds perfect, she squealed. Finally, something good. I smiled. Let them think it was a gift. Let them pack their bags with smugness and entitlement. Because while they were drinking cocktails under palm trees, I was busy reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I cleared their clutter, donated every luxury item they'd flaunted, scrubbed their scent from the walls of my home. And by the time their plane touched back down on American soil, the locks had changed. Their names were off every document. And the cruise? Billed directly to Jason's own credit line, the one I quietly accessed using his carelessness as my permission slip. The house was no longer theirs. The money wasn't mine to give. And the life they thought they controlled? That, too, had quietly slipped through their fingers. Jason's call came just minutes after their plane landed, his voice sharp with confusion, then panic. Mom, he barked, why are all our things gone? Why can't we get into the house? And what is this? He sent me a photo of the invoice, itemized expenses from their luxury vacation, now billed entirely to him. Flights, resorts, fine dining, spa treatments, all charged to a credit line that bore his name, not mine. I'd simply managed it while they were away, just like I managed every part of their lives. Quietly, efficiently, invisibly. Only now, I wasn't playing caretaker anymore. I was holding up the mirror. When he called again, this time with fury in his voice, I answered calmly. The money you spent, Jason? It wasn't mine. It never was. You just never noticed whose name was on the account. You're my mother, he shouted, like that title was a magic shield. Isn't it normal for a son to rely on his mother? I laughed, softly, without bitterness. You remember I'm your mother only when you need something. But tell me, Jason, when was the last time you ever looked me in the eyes and just said, I love you, Mom? Silence. An hour later, they were pounding on my door like a SWAT team. Jason yelling, Erica sobbing, both accusing me of betrayal. I opened it just enough to block their way, my body calm, my voice even. This house isn't yours, I said. Erica sneered. You gave it to us. I handed Jason a folder, crisp and heavy. Inside was the deed. My name and mine alone. You signed a ceremonial intent form. I said, not a legal one. You were too busy celebrating to notice the fine print. For display purposes only. Jason's face crumbled. Erica grabbed the papers with trembling hands. You tricked us. No, I replied. I protected myself. Finally. Then I pulled out the final envelope, the one I'd kept hidden for over 3 decades. You're not my biological son, I said. Your mother was the woman who shattered my marriage. But I raised you anyway. I gave you everything. And now I'm done. He sank to the floor, speechless. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The last thing I heard before I closed the door was Jason's voice cracking through the wood. You're lying. You have to be lying. But I wasn't. For the first time in years, I was telling the whole truth, and it was unraveling him. I stood there for a moment, hand on the doorknob, listening to the sound of someone breaking, quiet. Deep sobs from a man who had built his entire identity on control and convenience. And now, stripped of both, he was just hollow. Erica shouted, threatened, pleaded. But I didn't answer. I didn't open the door. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore. That night, the silence in my house wasn't lonely. It was clean.
Free.
But peace, I've learned, doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it arrives in the aftermath. After years of giving, forgiving, and hoping for something that never existed. I went to bed early and slept like I hadn't in years. But the next morning, everything changed again. The pounding at the door was frantic. Not rage this time, desperation. I looked through the peephole and saw them both slumped on the porch.
Pale. Disoriented.
Faces gray with exhaustion and fear. I opened the door just enough to hear Jason wheeze out, help us. My stomach turned, but my hands were steady. I called 911. The doctors later said the combination of stress, poor diet, and untreated conditions had caught up with them fast. High blood pressure, liver strain, possibly early signs of heart failure. They'll survive, one nurse said gently, but they may never be the same. I gave a small nod. That's no concern of mine, I replied. When I stepped into the hospital room, Jason's eyes fluttered open. His voice was barely a whisper.
Mom, I'm sorry.
I looked at him, really looked. This man I'd raised, defended, bailed out, fed, clothed, and protected. And still, what I saw was a stranger. I leaned in and said quietly, You should be sorry for being a thankless parasite. Then I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I just walked. And for the first time in my 63 years, I was walking away from me. It's strange how peace doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It just arrives quietly, like the first breath after a long cry. That's how it felt the day I stepped into Daniel's bookstore, soft jazz playing in the background, the smell of old pages and fresh coffee in the air. He looked up from behind the counter and smiled, like he'd been expecting me. Maybe in a way, he had. I didn't tell him everything, not at first. He didn't ask either. That was the magic of Daniel. He never demanded space in my life. He just offered a steady place to rest if I chose to take it. In the weeks that followed, something in me started to thaw. We walked together in the mornings, joined a local pottery class, and rebuilt the backyard garden I had once let wither.
Mint.
Lavender. Rosemary. They bloomed as if they'd been waiting for me to come back to life. Daniel never tried to fix me. He just stood beside me while I fixed myself. And slowly, the house transformed from a place of obligation into a home that finally reflected me. I changed the curtains, repainted the kitchen cabinets, donated the matching his and hers mugs Jason and Erica bought for themselves, and left behind like they own the place.
Now,
my kitchen only holds the things I love. Then one quiet afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside were executive-level files from Graham Outdoor Group. Jason's name had been scrubbed clean from every project, every asset, every deal. Not a trace of him left. I didn't ask who sent it. I didn't need to. Daniel slid a cup of coffee toward me, just as he always did, and I smiled. "Thank you," I said softly. He smiled back and said nothing. Because that's what real peace looks like. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush. It just exists, waiting for you to finally choose it. Later that evening, we sat on the porch, wrapped in a light blanket as the sun dipped behind the trees. Daniel turned to me, his voice warm and gentle. "Do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" I looked at him, my chest quiet, my heart finally still. "Maybe I already am," I whispered. And for once, I wasn't afraid of the answer. The day I finally let go of the past, it didn't come with a dramatic goodbye or a single, defining moment. It came in layers, subtle, deliberate choices that felt like taking my life back inch by inch. One morning, I stood in front of my closet and realized I hadn't worn my favorite color in years. Erica once told me lavender made me look washed out, so I stopped wearing it. That day, I wore a lavender blouse and walked through town with my head held high. People smiled. I smiled back. I didn't feel invisible anymore. It's funny how quiet freedom feels when it finally comes. I began filling my days with things that once felt like luxuries, but were really necessities. Reading for hours without guilt, cooking only for myself, saying no without explaining. Daniel was always nearby, never pushy, never asking for more than I was willing to give. He'd leave notes in my garden, little sketches of herbs with words like, "You're blooming too." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Then one morning, as I was trimming the rosemary, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, I checked the message. "Hi Mom, it's Jason. I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm not okay. I miss you. I'm sorry." My hand froze. Not out of shock, but because I felt nothing.
Noray. Noche.
No ache meant no attachment, and no attachment meant I was free. That night, I sat on the porch with Daniel again. The sky was the color of warm honey, the kind of evening that made everything feel softer. I played Jason's message for Daniel. When it ended, he didn't speak. He just reached over, gently squeezed my hand, and waited. After a while, I said, "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not going back." Daniel nodded. "You don't owe anyone your peace." And I realized he was right. My whole life, I thought love meant sacrifice. Now I knew better. Love should never ask you to disappear just to keep someone else comfortable. So, I deleted the message. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. And just like that, the past stayed where it belonged, behind me. I thought deleting that voicemail would be the end of it. But guilt has a way of clinging to people who never learn the difference between love and possession. A week later, I found them standing at the edge of my driveway, Jason and Erica, thinner now, worn out, but still carrying that entitlement in their posture. Erica clutched a folder. Jason looked down at his shoes like a scolded child. "We're not here to fight," he said softly. "We just want to talk." I didn't step forward. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, the same way I used to stand waiting for school buses. For late-night returns, for apologies that never came. Talk, then, I said, my voice even. But they didn't speak right away. Erica opened the folder and held up a document with trembling hands. We're requesting mediation, she said, eyes glinting with practiced innocence. You're still family, and Jason has a legal right to your care. You raised him. You owe him support in his time of need. It was almost laughable. You're trying to sue me for what? I asked, brows raised. Unpaid emotional debt, Jason said quietly, not meeting my eyes. You can't just cut us off like we never mattered. I stepped down the porch step slowly, my feet steady on the gravel. You think I owe you because I fed you? Clothed you? Because I carried every weight you threw at me without complaint. I looked at him hard. Jason, the only thing I owe anyone now is my own peace. He flinched. We're also looking into grandparent visitation rights, Erica added stiffly. You may not want us, but the law says we can still be part of your life. That's when I knew this wasn't love or regret. It was desperation dressed in legal stationery. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of clarity that only comes when you've already survived the worst. You're welcome to try, I said, turning back toward my porch. But I suggest you read up on Vermont statutes. They're not as generous as you remember me being. And with that, I closed the door. Let them knock. Let them scramble. I was no longer the woman who begged to be seen. I was the woman who walked away and meant it. The threat stopped when they realized I wasn't bluffing. No panicked follow-up calls. No envelopes taped to my door. Just silence, the kind that used to terrify me, but now felt like freedom. I poured myself a cup of tea one crisp March morning and stood at the window, watching the last of the winter melt from the edges of the air garden. Life was settling into something soft and sacred. No more waiting for the next insult disguised as concern, or the next request masquerading as love. The chaos that once clung to my home like smoke had lifted, and in its place was air I could finally breathe. Daniel came by with a fresh loaf of sourdough and a book about heirloom tomatoes. Thought you might want to try something new this spring, he said with that quiet warmth I was still learning to let in. We spent the morning planting and laughing, knees in the dirt, hands covered in promise. There was no performance here, just two people choosing peace, one day at a time. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. Not from Jason. Not from Erica. From their attorney. I opened it slowly, expecting another shot across the bow, but instead it was a withdrawal. They were backing down. No legal pursuit, no visitation claim, nothing. Just a single sentence at the end. We will no longer be pursuing contact at this time. I stared at the paper, waiting for some kind of emotional reaction, but all I felt was stillness. That rare, golden kind of quiet that comes when you know the storm has truly passed. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and went back outside where Daniel was pruning the lavender. They're gone, I said simply. He looked up at me, then back at the plant in his hands. Good, he said. You deserve to grow. And for the first time in my life, I believed him. I didn't just survive what they did. I outgrew it. I had finally become someone I recognized, someone I respected. Not just a mother or a caretaker or a second thought. I was Margaret. I was whole. And for once, the life I was living felt like it belonged entirely to me. The funny thing about starting over at 63 is how quiet the victories are. There's no applause.
No fanfare.
Just small, sacred moments that whisper, you made it. Like the morning I walked into the town's community center and signed up for a watercolor class, something I'd always wanted to try but never did because someone always needed me first. Or the afternoon Daniel and I hosted a book swap in his store, and for the first time in years, I looked around a crowded room and didn't feel invisible. But it was what came next that surprised me most. One evening, as we sipped chamomile tea on the porch, Daniel handed me a package. It was delivered to the shop by mistake, he said. Addressed to you. Inside were internal documents, confidential, no return address. I unfolded each page slowly, my heart picking up pace with every line. Jason's name had been officially removed from the executive registry of Graham Outdoor Group. All holdings, all authority,
Erased.
his title gone. His future with the company terminated without ceremony. There was no note, no explanation. But I didn't need one. Someone wanted me to know. Daniel said nothing. He just rose, went inside, and returned with a fresh cup of coffee. He set it beside me with the same steady grace he always carried. I looked at him, this man who had seen all the wreckage and never once asked for a cleaned-up version of me, and I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest, peace without apology. I could have called Jason, could have gloated, demanded answers, indulged in one last "I told you so." But I didn't. Because healing doesn't always need a witness. Sometimes, it's enough just to know that justice arrived quietly, that the universe has its own clock, and when it chimes, it's not loud, it's precise. I folded the documents and placed them in my keepsake box, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder, I survived. I endured. And now I thrive. Later that night, Daniel turned to me and asked, "Do you feel lighter these days?" I smiled. "No," I said, resting my hand over his. "I feel grounded." And in that still moment under the stars, I knew I wasn't rebuilding the life I had lost. I was building the one I had always deserved. Somewhere between the scent of fresh basil and the sound of old jazz drifting through the screen door, I realized I had stopped waiting. I no longer waited for apologies, for recognition, for someone to ask if I was okay. I had stopped performing, stopped shrinking, stopped trying to be the version of myself that made others comfortable. I was finally just me. Not Jason's mother. Not Erica's live-in help. Not the invisible woman behind the curtain of someone else's life. I was Margaret, loud in my own quiet way, steady-rooted, and finally choosing myself. One golden evening, as the sun melted behind the hills and our little herb garden bathed in orange light, Daniel sat beside me on the porch, legs stretched out, his fingers gently brushing mine. The air was soft, warm, safe. And then, so casually it made my heart skip, he asked, "Do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" I turned to look at him, his profile lit by the sunset, familiar and still somehow new. I could have made a joke. I could have changed the subject. But I didn't. I just held his gaze and answered honestly, "Maybe I already am." He didn't respond with a grand speech or dramatic gesture. He just smiled, that quiet, knowing kind of smile that holds more truth than words ever could. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not long ago, I believed my story was finished. That my purpose had been spent on people who saw me as a utility, not a person. I thought that once motherhood ended, once usefulness faded, I would too. But I was wrong. Turns out, peace isn't passive. It's a choice. A bold, deliberate choice to let go of the version of life we thought we had to live and create the one we want to live. I don't know if this chapter with Daniel will be my last. I don't need to know. What I do know is this. I'm no longer surviving. I'm not waiting at the edge of someone else's story, hoping for a place in the narrative. I am the author now. And for the first time in my 63 years, the life I'm writing finally sounds like me.